I think it's on. Great. Thanks, everybody. I don't work with Livestock. I think everybody else here does, so I'm a little bit of an outlier, but I wanted to talk a little bit about data visualization and working with large amounts of data and utilizing human intuition with it. And data visualization is a part of data science, an area that's just recently developed. I think it grew a lot out of Wall Street hiring lots of physics PhDs, because that's where the big job is in physics these days. And because they were experimentalists and knew how to handle large amounts of data, and they were finding good applications of that, analyzing large amounts of financial data. And now we have nearly 200 data science programs across the US, including our own. Also, there's some 200,000 data scientist jobs out there that go unfilled each year. So there's a huge demand for data scientists, and we're barely able to keep up with that. We have a program that we recently launched a little over a year ago. It's a Master of Computer Science in Data Science. And we offer that on the Coursera MOOC platform. The MOOC platform is, these are courses you can take for free. You go and watch videos. The lessons are organized in little video lessons running five minutes each or so. And you can binge through a whole bunch of them, or you can watch a few of them as you have time. And it turns out to be one of the most effective ways to teach at scale that we've found. And we've been looking at the problem for well over 10 years. We've offered our master's degree in computer science for since the 90s, and the University of Illinois invented some of online education with the Plato system back in the 60s and 70s. But this platform really seems to offer some methods and some successes for teaching at scale that we hadn't encountered before. And so we've been taking advantage of it by offering, I think we have 3 degrees on the platform now. One of the few places that has degrees available. But let me also mention, we don't give university credit for taking a MOOC. The MOOCs are just the lecture portions of these classes, and alongside with these classes, if you're getting university credit, you have to pass exams, proctored exams, and do projects and interact with the TAs and the instructional staff. So you can get your Master's of Computer Science in Data Science through this program. And one of the things that it opened up to us when we started offering a master's degree in computer science, focusing on data science, we weren't seeing the usual crop of applications coming from students with a bachelor's degree in computer science. We were seeing this. And we're seeing students applying from all over the place. I think the blue area, dark blue areas are engineering. The light blue areas are business. The orange areas are the sciences. We were even getting people from the humanities, the social sciences. I think one of them there is romance philology. And it really surprised us, and that's because data and information is becoming, its own commodity. We need to work at this not just in computing, but in every field. It's really broadened, and everybody has needs to work with this. And we're seeing that a data science degree, students are adding a master's degree in data science degree on top of their bachelor's degree in some other field, in the same way that you might add an MBA on top of a bachelor's degree in another field. And so I've been teaching this data visualization course as part of that structure, and also as part of some Coursera specialization sequences. These are just MOOC sequences you can take. It started with this 4-week MOOC course in November of 2015. I've had over 100,000 students in the class, 4.5 stars. I'm still working on that last half a star. And a larger number of females than we usually get in our computer science classes, and that's always good to make sure that everybody has an opportunity at this. And there's a second visualization MOOC coming online soon, just as soon as I can finish it. And so data visualization is an important part of data science and managing data, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So one of the fun things I did with data visualization when we're going through applications maybe 10 years ago on our system, I took a look and plotted how popular all the professors were. And so the bar graph on the bottom, it's a bar graph. This is what visualization looks like, right? You have a bar graph of data. And the challenge is usually not creating this bar graph, it's finding the appropriate data to put into that bar graph. And so in this case, the altitude of the bar graph is the number of students that ask to work with each professor in our department. And some professors are more popular, some professors are less popular. And to not embarrass anybody, I didn't include anybody's name. But you can see that some professors are more popular, some are less popular, and then I colored the bar graph. The horizontal axis is in alphabetical order. And so I colored the bar graph based on if the professor was the first choice, the second choice, or the third choice. First choice is blue, second choice is orange, and third choice is green. And you can start to see a trend, and that is that the professors early in the alphabet are getting chosen first. Professors later in the alphabet are getting chosen last. And you know, some of these professors like Cheng Zheng Zhai are thinking, why don't students want to work with me? Well, they do. It's just that the faculty were presented in a top-down drop-down list, and students, being any other user, are just dropping down and picking the first professor they want to work with, the second professor they want to work with, and then the third professor they want to work with in that sorted list. And that's something that was only revealed to us through kind of this data visualization, and that's the trick for data visualization. I've built on top of that, and I'm also the Executive Associate Dean of the Graduate College at the University of Illinois, and one of the things I've done there is create a dashboard for all graduate programs on campus showing, for example, how what our selectivity is at the master's and doctoral level, demographics, time to degree, and how students are supported, and how much tuition we waive each year. It's amazing how much tuition we don't collect in the process of giving students graduate degrees, and how that works well with the economy of everything. But one of those things that's kind of striking until you visualize it and see how it works. So visualization is important, and it was stressed by none other than Fred Brooks. He wrote the Mythical Man Month that showed that when you add a person to a software project, it delays it even further. But when he won the Turing Award in computer science, kind of the Nobel Prize for computer science, he gave this talk, and one of the slides on the talk had this simple inequality. It said, "Computer plus human is greater than computer." And sure, it seems a bit obvious that something plus something is greater than the original. But it's important, as we look at machine learning and data analysis and all these computational tools to extract meaning from data automatically, we don't want a human slowing those down. So in machine learning, computer plus human is less than computer alone because the human slows down the processing. But there's more information there than we can really handle yet with machine learning. We have not yet bowed down to our overlords, and robots have not taken over the world yet. And in the meantime, there are still things we can do that computers can't. And one of those is to provide insight to understand what's going on in our data. And so putting humans in the loop is still a necessary part of data science. And so that brings us to data visualization and the importance of data visualization and the human in the loop. And so we have methods for data acquisition, data processing, and data display, and I think we saw those in the previous talk, some great methods for acquiring data with sensors. We're collecting way more data than we can really process these days. I think we've collected as much data in the past few years as we've collected in all of history before that. But there's also issues of how do you display the data, how does the human perceive the data, how does the human work? And one of my favorite classes to teach in computer science is human-computer interaction, because I'll spend a week talking about the human, and most of my students have no idea what I'm talking about. And so I have to explain the human in terms of being a computer. They've got a certain amount of memory, they've got a certain reaction speed, and we can measure these things and put parameters there. And you start to figure out what happens to the data after it leaves the display, but before it gets to your cognitive system. And so there's all sorts of visualization. Visualization started out in mathematics. Here, there was no data. You just had a formula that generated numbers. You didn't need to store anything. I got my master's degree for the making the picture on the bottom right, and there's very little actual information in that picture. It's a simple quadratic equation that generated this in a four-dimensional number system. But once you start getting data and large amounts of data, you can do much more things with it. This is an example of some recent work we did on Lagrangian coherent structures. These are basically moving fronts in unsteady fluid flow, and there's a lot of great science and sound mathematics about steady state fluid flow, but once the fluid flow becomes unsteady, changing over time, and the motion of the fronts, it becomes much more difficult. And let's see if I can get over there. There. And so we can see here, this is an aorta that's enlarged, and the streamlines here on the left are what was used to find those moving fronts where those streamlines diverge. And it's an incredible amount of data, some 1 million tets in this simulation. But to prevent an aortic aneurysm, that's worth it. And then there's also raw information visualization, which gets more at the core of data visualization. With scientific visualization, often the data come with some kind of coordinates, some kind of spatial coordinates. So, and each point in space will have temperature or pressure or some other values that you can plot, some quantitative values. As you get more abstract, you start to lose spatial coordinates. You still may have quantitative values, but they may not have spatial meaning. For example, this is a plot of all the friend relationships of 7 million participants in Flickr from a while ago. And these social networks are particularly difficult to visualize. And so here's an example of a protein interaction graph. The one on the left is with all the edges, and it just starts to clump up. You can't really see anything. You can't use your human intuition to try to figure out what's going on there. And it turns out that when we do graph layout, we're basically treating the edges as springs and the nodes as little mass points, and things start to clump up. If we have too many springs, then everything clumps up a lot. And so if we get rid of some of the springs, we can relax the graph and get a much more orderly layout like we have on the right. And you can start to see, some better organization. You can start to work with that cognitively. And so we have to throw out some edges. In this case, we throw out edges based on what's called betweenness centrality. So in a network, betweenness centrality is the number of shortest paths from any one node to any other node that goes through an edge. And we just start to throw out the low betweenness centrality edges. Those are the ones that have the fewest shortest paths going through them. They're less essential. And what you're left with is a tree that you can lay out much more evenly, and then you can start adding those edges back in if you want to see that side structure. Here's another graph visualization. In this case, we did the exact opposite. We threw out the high betweenness centrality edges. We took the edges from any one node to any other node and threw out the ones that had the most shortest paths from any node to any other node. And what that does is that reveals the communication pathways between communities. If you have communities communicating here and communities communicating there, and then a few pathways where they're communicating with each other, if you throw those edges out, then you've separated the two communities. And so if you do that, you get this nice hierarchical structure that we've organized with these edges in between, these curved edges in between. And the nodes are actually every college football team. And an edge is when that football team's played another football team. And the community structure that it reveals are the conferences. And so as you look at data visualization and methods of looking at data, you get three basic kinds of modes of visualization, three things that you're doing. The first is interactive visualization. This is usually a single investigator. You've got your data and you are looking for insight. You're trying to figure out what's going on in your data. And you use that for discovery. That's where you're going to discover information. It's not fancy. It's usually you and some software tool and trying out a bunch of different things, very rough around the edges and not fancy at all. At the other end of the spectrum is what's called presentation visualization. These are the final figures that go in your Nature paper, or go into a documentary on the subject. And they're primarily used for communication. It's when you understand something about your data and you want to communicate it to other people, and you just want to let the data speak as much as possible, so that you're not adding your own personal biases to it, but you need to still convey what the data is trying to say. And somewhere in between there is this interesting mode of visualization that's arisen with the internet called interactive storytelling, where you get data that's available on the internet that you can present to other people, but allows them to interact and to explore further. And that's the topic of this second MOOC that'll be coming out soon on data visualization. So, and we talk about data visualization, and this is a recent revolution in the area of visualization, to tie it so closely with data, as in databases. Prior to about 2000, data, it was mostly scientific visualization and many different ways of interacting with coordinate data, and then we started tying the visualization with data, and Pat Hanrahan and others came out with Tableau in the early papers that became Tableau. And we started to see a stronger connection between visualization and databases. And so instead of SQL, the structured query language, where you're querying your database with these text strings, you're creating what's called VizQL. And you can't type VizQL yourself. It's under the hood in Tableau, but that's basically the query language that's being generated when you start dragging fields from your data into your Tableau shelves. And what you have on the right is a very, very tiny image of an example of Tableau, but you're basically dragging fields from your database and then getting a chart generated from them. And as you're doing that, Tableau is automatically generating the appropriate query to get that data aggregated properly. Tableau also has a thing called Show Me. And Show Me is a recommendation for the most effective chart based on the type of data. And so it's very easy to make a bad visualization and use a bar chart when you should be using a line chart. And you need to know if you're dealing with quantitative data or categorical data, whether the quantitative data is ordered or if it's continuous or discrete. And Tableau automatically figures that out for you. One of the things I go over in that visualization course is how to know what's the most appropriate chart to properly convey the data based on the kind of data you're showing. And then finally, another recent advance in the connection of data visualization and databases is D3. D3 stands for Data-Driven Documents, and it's an internet standard for joining the data in your database with the elements, the data elements on your web page, so that you can just create a web page with 6 boxes and then join that with your data, and that changes attributes of those boxes to make them into a bar chart. And that's become a very powerful way of visualizing data by thinking of a database of elements that you're using to display the data and the data itself, and using database semantics of join to be able to connect those up. And so once you have these tools, Tableau, D3, other tools, in order to access the data and to plot it, then what you're left with is a massive amount of data across a massive number of dimensions, and you've got to make some sense of it. And so there's this data visualization mantra. It was taught to me by Ben Schneiderman. He's a HCI professor that just retired here at the University of Maryland. And that mantra is that you first want an overview of your data. You've got a lot of data. You need to get your head around it. You need to get all the data out on the screen so that you can start to work with it. And so you need some kind of overview of the data. Once you've got that overview, then you can work kind of top down and start to filter out things that you're not interested in and zoom in on the things you are interested in. And then it's important to provide details, but only on demand. It's very easy to overwhelm the display and to try to put as much information as possible on the screen. You don't want to do that. You want to keep things simple and then provide the details only when they're requested. So here's a little example I worked out using that principle. On the right, we have a scatter plot of every country in the world, and the countries have coordinate data, right? They have shapes and latitude and longitude lines, but I haven't plotted them using those latitude longitude lines. Most of your data is not going to have latitude longitude lines, and so I just did a scatter plot where the horizontal axis is population and the vertical axis is life expectancy, and that spreads out the data in a way. It's not necessarily the most intuitive way. And these aren't necessarily the best two axes. I just need to find two axes that spread the data out so I can start to look at the data and start to focus on things. And so if you want to look at the relationship between life expectancy and population, you just plot those two axes and then spread them out. And you can make them logarithmic or whatever you need in order to get the data to spread out well. And once you've got that overview of all the data in some kind of scatter plot that separates things out, now you can start to dig in and drill down into some of the things you might be interested in. So we can filter. So there's the entire world. Say I want to look at the continent of Africa, and so I can filter out all the countries except the countries in Africa, and I get the scatter plot on the right. So the population still varies, but life expectancy decreases just a little bit. And then as I'm filtering, you see this top row of countries, and that's different than the bottom clump of countries. So you can start to zoom into that top row of countries that have the highest life expectancy and try to figure out some trends that are causing that higher life expectancy versus the lower life expectancy of the other countries in Africa. And then as you start to look at that lower clump of countries, you can start to drill down, mouse over each of the details there in order to find out what's going on. You can add any number of other dimensions to that data once you start to drill down on that. And finally, let me just walk through some visualization systems I've been working on recently that use some of the techniques that we go over in that Coursera MOOC class and others. One of these is invertnet.org. If you go to invertnet.org, you'll see this project that we did. We basically built this robot in the middle that would scan a bunch of drawers of bugs. And these are in our entomology department. We have one of the largest collections, some 15,000 specimen drawers of these insect samples. And we scanned them all, put them online, and we got funded from the NSF program on digitizing biological collections. And so we did this for 15 other locations across the U.S. And that's all available on invertnet.org. And you can get high school and elementary school students going in there looking at the bug collections. They don't have to send a letter out and ask you to mail a drawer to them. They can look on the internet, and actually they can help with some of the classification. I also worked with the LSST telescope. This is in Chile, and it's like the biggest CCD camera in the world. It's a 3 gigapixel camera, and we're basically building a little visualization interface that takes a tremendous amount of data that's downloaded every 15 seconds, a new image every 15 seconds, so that people can look at it and see if there's something wrong with the telescope before the next image comes. This is going to save the world because it could do things like it can see in asteroids or other things that might be coming at us, as well as any supernovas or other events in the sky. But and it basically scans the sky. And one of the things in doing the visualization interface is not just using the XY coordinates of all the pixels, but basically looking at histograms of the pixels or other, basically plotting the brightness of the pixel horizontally and the number of pixels that have that brightness vertically, and looking at other statistics on the image and visualizing those to see if anything's gone wrong, looking for when the CCD cells have overflowed, for example. I've been working with Caterpillar and the DMDI, the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute. This is an institute announced by President Obama a couple years ago. To basically use visualization to make sure that parts as they're being manufactured on the shop floor are being manufactured correctly by scanning the part as you're manufacturing it and being able to make corrections on the fly. And again, we need visualization, obviously, for that to be able to see what's going on. And then finally, the one that I think is most appropriate for you is this Crops in Silico project. And this is basically confronts the problem that we've got global warming and arable land is being moved in the northern latitudes mostly. And that land is less fertile, and so at the same time we've got a population explosion, and so as we're getting less fertile land, we're getting more people that need food, and trying to make soybean plants, maize plants, and so on more productive, and looking at that through computer simulation so that we don't need to go through an entire growth cycle in order to figure that out. Those computer simulations, we can't simulate everything at the molecular level because it's just way too massive. So we have this multi-layer simulation that needs to communicate with each other. And there's this nice diagram for one of the papers that shows some of the examples of the visualizations, just some simple line plots, but being able to align those line plots in time with each other to look at correlations between CO2 and light intensity and temperature, and integrate those effects at the crop level all the way down into the organ and cellular level, back and forth, and we greatly depend on visualization. Again, some very simple visualization techniques, but getting the right data into those techniques is really the challenge. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Nick Sorrell, Iowa State. Great talk.
Thanks.
And I would like to connect your talk to Nora's talk from yesterday. She mentioned, well, we're generating a lot of data, and perhaps we don't need statistics. We can, the amount of data will offset the need of statistics. For instance, so what do you think how both information could potentially connect in some of these situations that, well, there's a lot of data, and perhaps there are some limitations to analyze, and perhaps we don't need to find new models, or should we stick always to statistics? Should we stick always to visualizing data, combine them? How much do you think that should balance this?
That's an interesting point. I missed that talk, and I wish I would have seen that. I got in late. So you always want to check these models. I know in doing the just that simple graduate program dashboard, we came across all sorts of anomalies. There was one program that had an average time to degree of like 10 years. And we're trying to figure out why that was, and it's because that program only had 2 students, and both students had taken some time off and then come back and finished the degree. So it's important for data curation to have the provenance of the data, to know what generated the data, so that you can go back and check the data when you discover these anomalies. I did see another talk just a few weeks ago. We had a visitor speaking on a system where you could make some plots, and there's always going to be outliers, and to be able to circle those outliers and then follow the provenance of those outliers back into the original data set so you can see what's causing the outliers. So I think you can I think you can do a lot of when you have massive amounts of data, it does change your approach to the problems, but you still have to pay attention to to that provenance of the data, even when there's large amounts of data. And we're building new tools like that to deal with tiny problems that creep up in large amounts of data, to make sure that they're there, but they're still going to be problematic. So I don't know if that answers her concern, but
It seems to me that this would potentially be a very difficult topic to teach because each problem is a one-off. Do you just educate students on tools in the toolbox, or to roll in the data, or what's the strategy on teaching?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Certainly the details of the data, the semantics of your data are going to change from area to area. But some of those principles don't. There are some important principles about data visualization. You want to use, you want to know, is what you're plotting against what you're plotting, are these categorical axes, are they ordinal, are they discrete, are they continuous? Those, knowing if your horizontal axis and vertical axis are based on those kinds of quantities, tells you if you want to use a bar chart, a line chart, a table, or a scatter plot, any number of things. There's certain fundamentals about human cognition, what colors to pick in order to confront the fact that 5-10% of males are colorblind. What cultural biases do we have towards some colors, and so on. So there's certain fundamentals about that. The chart junk. You don't want to fill. You don't want to have unnecessary information in your charts. Things like that. That go into the visual design of these visualizations to make them more effectively display what you're actually looking for. Because it's very easy one, to distract the viewer from the message you're trying to get to them, and two, it's very easy to mislead the viewer. And there's all sorts of examples of showing this amazing crash in a bar graph because you've got a very tiny, the horizontal line is not at zero. It's like 90% and 89%, and there's this dip from 90% to 89%. Oh my gosh, it's so big, when really it's just a tiny 1% dip. It's very easy to do that in the effort to make your data look as dramatic and as important as possible. It's very easy to mislead the reader, the viewer, based on that. And so there are those fundamentals that don't change from area to area. But then the intuition about which variables to look at in your particular database, that does depend on your particular area. Yeah.
Quick question, because we're being rushed here, but could you comment briefly about the computational requirements for visualization of data in the way of scalability? Is this something that you need a high-performance center for? Can you do it on your computer? What can you do in each platform and things like that, please?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the answer is no, you don't really need a high-performance computer to do almost all the visualization that we do. Very often, the high-performance computing is used for the simulation. It's used for those Lagrangian coherent structures because we have to set off a tremendous number of particles to look for where they diverge to find out where those front lines are in an unsteady flow. But for most things, all you're looking for is a simple bar chart, a line chart. In order to get things that simple, you've got to explore a lot of data. And so you need computational facilities sufficient to be able to do your database queries at an interactive rate. So if you have a huge database, you need a database system that can handle a query at interactive speeds. As long as you have that, you really have the tools you need in order to find what you're looking for in your data set. And then you don't need 3 dimensions, you don't need fancy rendering. You just need bar charts, line charts, scatter plots, the usual tools. The only other caveat to that is when you're looking at relationships, if you're doing graphs and so on. And when you're computing relationships, often those require, significantly more computation, a lot of optimization to get things laid out properly. So in some very special cases, you'll need lots of computation to do layout and optimization and so on. But for most cases, it's really just getting that query done quickly.
let's thank our speaker again.
Thanks.